Welcome to Cheat Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. Her laughter stopped mid-sentence the moment her eyes found mine. Her face went pale. Her hands went still. And I walked toward that table, calm, steady, envelope in hand, carrying the weight of everything I knew, everything she'd hidden, and everything that was about to end. Right there, between the wine glasses and the candlelight. But to understand what that moment meant, you have to understand what came before it. My name is John, and for 11 years, I loved a woman named Sarah with everything I had. We built a life together, a real one, not the performed kind. Late nights talking about dreams that felt close enough to touch. A home that was warm. Children who filled it with noise and movement and the specific, irreplaceable chaos of a family that's genuinely happy. I thought we were that. I believed it, completely, for a long time. I was wrong. The restaurant that night was the kind of place that exists to make people feel like their lives are more elegant than they are. Dim lighting. Polished glasses. Soft piano threading through the air like it belonged there. I walked in, and the maitre d' greeted me, and I barely acknowledged him, because my eyes had already found them. Sarah. In the blue dress I had given her. Leaning slightly toward a man I didn't know. Tall, well-dressed, radiating the particular confidence of someone who has never once been caught. His hand rested near hers on the table. Her smile, the one I hadn't seen directed at me in years, was alive and easy and entirely real. I stood there for a moment. Then I walked forward. The marriage hadn't broken all at once. That's not how it works. Not really. It breaks the way a structure weakens before it collapses. Small cracks first, almost invisible, easy to explain away. Sarah's late nights began gradually. An art event here, a meeting with students there. She was a teacher, and the explanations were always just plausible enough. I noticed the unease, but I pressed it down. I trusted her. 11 years had given me that trust, and I wasn't willing to give it up over a feeling I couldn't name. But the feeling grew. One evening she came home later than expected, face flushed, explanation rehearsed but hollow. Something about a gallery owner wanting to discuss a collaboration. She slid past me into the kitchen without meeting my eyes. I nodded. I didn't push. I told myself I was overthinking. Then came the phone calls. More than once, I'd walked into a room to find her speaking in hushed tones, laughter that stopped the moment she heard my footsteps, a call that ended abruptly, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes when she said just a student with a wave of her hand. The small things. The perfume on her coat that wasn't mine. Her phone, screen down whenever I sat close. The way she flinched once, just slightly, just enough, when I leaned toward her on the couch. I told myself stories. I rewrote what I was seeing into something manageable. Because the alternative, the real explanation, was too large to look at directly while I was still living inside the life it would destroy. One rainy evening, she rushed out the door claiming to meet a colleague, and I stood in the hallway and watched her disappear into the dark, and for the first time, I let myself feel the anger underneath the grief. That night, I made a decision. I didn't hire a private investigator lightly. For weeks I wrestled with it, torn between the man who wanted to trust his wife and the man whose instincts were screaming that trust was no longer something he could afford. But after another night of vague excuses and hurried departures, I accepted the truth. I needed answers, whatever they were. Her name was Elena. Sharp-eyed, efficient, completely without sentiment, which was exactly what I needed. I sat across from her and laid out everything I'd noticed. The late nights. The phone calls. The shift in the air between Sarah and me that I couldn't pin down but couldn't ignore. She listened. She said it could be nothing. And then she said, "But if it's something, we'll find it." The first few days yielded little beyond routine. But on the third day, Elena called. "She's meeting someone," she said. "Not at a gallery. Not at school. A cafe downtown." The photos arrived on my phone in the quiet of my office. Sarah leaning toward a man across a small table, her face lit up with a smile I recognized from years ago, from the early days, from the version of our marriage I had been trying to get back to. His hand near hers. Her posture open, comfortable, intimate in the specific way that only comes with time and intention. I stared at those photos for a long time. Then Elena called again, and what she told me next changed everything. His name was Peter. Elena had spent a week tracing him, his movements, his background, the careful architecture of a life built on other people's trust. What she found wasn't just an affair. It was a pattern, a professional one. Peter was a con artist. Not a careless one, a practiced, methodical one with a history of aliases, fraudulent accounts, and a trail of women who had trusted him with their money and their hearts and been left with neither. He targeted vulnerability. He moved with charm and patience and the particular skill of a man who had learned exactly how to make a lonely person feel seen. And Sarah, my wife, the mother of my children, the woman I had spent 11 years building a life with, fit his profile perfectly. Successful enough, lonely enough, yearning for something she couldn't name, wealthy enough to be worth the effort. The bank records confirmed it. Transfers from accounts I hadn't recognized, in amounts carefully spread to avoid notice. Significant sums. Family money. Our money, redirected quietly, steadily, into accounts that belonged to a man whose real name might not even have been Peter. The betrayal hit me in layers. First the affair, then the money, then, underneath both of those, the deeper truth. That Sarah had been so lost, so far from who she had been with me, that she had handed the most vulnerable parts of herself to a man who was calculating the return on investment. I sat with Elena's folder spread open on my desk, and I felt something settle inside me. Cold and permanent and completely clear. I knew what I had to do. Not in a moment of rage, that had already burned through and left nothing behind but ash. In precision. In patience. In a restaurant, on a specific evening, with an envelope in my hand. I chose the restaurant carefully. It was the kind of place Sarah had always loved. Understated elegance. The kind that required a reservation weeks in advance and made you feel, from the moment you stepped inside, like whatever was about to happen mattered. Good. I wanted it to matter. I wanted the setting to be worthy of the weight of what I was carrying. I arrived, and the maitre d' greeted me, and I walked past him without breaking stride, my eyes already scanning, already finding them in the far corner. Sarah in the blue dress, my gift, her back to the entrance, completely relaxed. Peter beside her, one hand on the table, fingers brushing hers, the posture of a man who believes he has already won. My steps were measured, deliberate. Each one felt loud in my ears, even though the room was full of the quiet sounds of other people's evenings. Glasses, conversation, piano. I was just another man in a suit. Nobody looked up. Nobody knew. Sarah didn't see me at first. She was mid-sentence, animated, her hands moving the way they did when she was genuinely engaged with something. Peter was watching her with the focused attention of a man performing interest, and doing it well. Then, some instinct, some shift in the air, she faltered. Her voice caught. Her eyes moved, searching, and then found mine. And her face changed. The laughter stopped. The color left her skin in a single moment, like a light being switched off. Her smile, that easy, alive smile, froze and then dissolved into something I had never seen on her face before. Pure, undisguised fear. Peter sensed the shift. He turned, and when he saw me, the confidence he wore like a second skin flickered, just briefly, before he reassembled himself. I kept walking. "Good evening," I said. My voice was steady, calm, genuinely calm, not performed. Because I had arrived at the far side of the storm, where everything had already been decided and the only thing left was the doing of it. I placed the envelope on the table, set it deliberately between her wine glass and her plate. The sound of paper on white linen was small and quiet, but it landed like something much heavier. Neither of them spoke. Sarah stared at the envelope the way you stare at something you already know is going to hurt you. Her hands hovered above the table, trembling slightly. Peter leaned back and attempted to reassemble his composure, jaw tightening, eyes moving between Sarah and me, calculating. "I think you should read it," I said. Not cruelly, just with the authority of someone who has already settled the matter inside himself. Sarah's fingers brushed the edge of the envelope, hesitant, as though touching it made the truth inside more real. Peter cleared his throat. "Look, maybe this isn't the—" My gaze moved to him. Sharp. Absolute. "You don't get to decide that," I said. He stopped. Sarah opened the envelope. Her hands shook enough that the paper rustled. She unfolded it, and her eyes moved across the words, and with each line, each clause of the divorce settlement, each legal sentence that formally ended 11 years of marriage, her face crumpled further. Tears built in her eyes. She looked up at me with something that was equal parts despair and desperation. "John, I raised one hand. Quietly. Firmly. Don't," I said. "I know everything, Sarah. Every excuse. Every lie. I've watched all of it. And now it ends here." The room around us continued its quiet, elegant business, completely unaware of the storm concentrated at one small candlelit table in the corner. I turned to Peter. "And you," I said, my voice dropping to something colder and more precise. "Do you want to explain yourself? Or should I do it for you?" He shifted. The silver-tongued ease he'd been performing all evening developed visible cracks. "I think we should all just calm down," he said, and even as he said it he seemed to understand how hollow it sounded. "Calm," I repeated. The word came out quiet, dangerously quiet. "You've conned my wife, stolen from my family, destroyed the life we built, and you want to ask for calm." Sarah's composure broke completely. She covered her face with her hands. Peter glanced toward the exit. A brief, involuntary movement, the look of a man calculating distance. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a small folder on the table. The papers inside fanned out slightly as they landed. Bank transfers, aliases, photos, documentation of prior victims, women who had trusted him the same way Sarah had, and had been left with nothing when the accounts ran dry. "Is this baseless?" I asked. Sarah's hands reached for the folder, shaking, tears falling onto the papers as she scanned them. Her lips moved silently. The color of her face shifted from pale to something closer to devastated. "Peter," she whispered, "tell him he's lying." Her voice cracked on the last word. Peter opened his mouth and closed it again. There was nothing there. No charm, no story, no exit. Just a man staring at the evidence of his own life laid out on a restaurant table while the woman he had manipulated wept over the paperwork. "Go ahead," I said softly. "Tell her. Convince her it's a lie." He said nothing. Sarah's hands slammed the folder shut. The sound was sharp enough to turn a head or two at nearby tables. Brief glances quickly returned to their own evenings. Her shoulders were shaking. Tears ran freely now, unchecked, her body betraying the full weight of what was collapsing around her. "Was any of it real?" she gasped, looking at Peter with wide, destroyed eyes. He hesitated, opened his mouth once, closed it. His silence was louder than any answer he could have given. John watched, and felt nothing like triumph. That was what surprised him most in that moment. He had expected some relief, some satisfaction at the precision of it, the completeness of the exposure. Instead, there was only a hollow, aching sadness, for the woman she had been once, for the family they had built, for the version of his life he would never get back. "You betrayed me," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. "But worse than that, you betrayed yourself. You let him manipulate you. You let him turn our life into a tool for his scheme. And when he's done, he'll leave you with nothing. Just like I said." Sarah's hands reached toward him, a trembling, wordless plea. He stepped back. The distance between them, physical, irrevocable, said everything the words couldn't. He turned to Peter one final time. His gaze was flat and cold and entirely unimpressed. "And you," he said quietly, "you'll face the consequences soon enough." Then he turned, walked away, each step measured and final, the sound of a door closing, clause by clause, on everything that had once been his. Behind him, Peter pushed back his chair with a scrape that turned heads, stood, and moved toward the exit with the hurried, graceless movements of a man whose mask has finally, completely fallen off. John didn't look back. Peter's unraveling was swift. The evidence John had compiled, bank records, aliases, documented connections to prior frauds, was handed to the authorities with the same methodical care John had applied to everything else. It wasn't long before the investigation found its footing. A routine traffic stop, outstanding warrants, a paper trail that stretched back years and across multiple victims. In court, Peter attempted his usual performance. Misdirection, victimhood, the carefully constructed language of a man who had spent years talking his way out of consequences. It didn't work. The evidence was too comprehensive. The testimonies too consistent. The judge's verdict was swift and final, years behind bars, the silver tongue silenced at last by the weight of everything he had done. Sarah turned inward. She sat in the house that night, alone in the silence of the life she had dismantled, and stared at a framed family photo on the coffee table. John. The children. Her own face, smiling, in a moment that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. She made the call to a therapist the next morning, voice shaking, barely able to explain what had happened or where to begin. "I don't recognize myself anymore," she said. And that was the truest thing she had said in a long time. Therapy was slow and painful and necessary. She unpacked the things she had avoided for years, the dissatisfaction she hadn't known how to name, the fear of what was fading, the misguided belief that what she needed lived somewhere outside the life she already had. She wrote letters she might never send. She cleaned out rooms she had been avoiding. She made quiet, private promises. She would not undo what she had done, but she would not remain who she had become. John walked out of that restaurant into cold night air and stood still for a moment beside his car. He looked at his own reflection in the window. He looked tired, more tired than he could remember feeling in a long time. But underneath the exhaustion, something else, something he hadn't felt in months. A quiet, stubborn, entirely uncomplicated resolve. The children were home, asleep, unaware of the evening's events in the way that children are mercifully unaware of the specific mechanics of their parents' grief. In the morning they would be at the kitchen table with their sleepy faces and their chatter about cartoons and school projects, and he would make breakfast and listen and smile and be entirely, completely present for them. That was the decision he had made. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a declaration. Just quietly, in the way real decisions are made, somewhere between the private investigator's office and the restaurant and the long, cold drive home. He had loved Sarah with everything he had for 11 years. That love had been real. He didn't need to revise that to survive the ending of it. But the foundation beneath it had cracked long before he admitted it, and no amount of patience or effort or carefully planned gestures could repair something that the other person was actively, deliberately, secretly undermining. He had done what he could. He had been the husband he promised to be. And when the truth finally made itself undeniable, he had faced it with the same steadiness he tried to bring to everything else. Now came the harder work. Not the anger that had burned through. Not the grief that would find its moments, quiet and private, in the stillness after the children were asleep. But the daily, unglamorous, entirely necessary work of rebuilding. Of being present for two small people who had done nothing wrong and deserved a father who wasn't defined by what had been taken from him. He exhaled, slowly, completely, and got in the car. The road ahead was long. He knew that. It would carry the weight of everything he was leaving behind. The house they had chosen together, the future they had planned, the early years when everything was still vivid and possible and entirely his. But it was his road now. Entirely, unconditionally his. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. Thank you for watching.